Hey guys, there's a lot of confusion about, what we mean when we say you don't need warm-ups on ColdSend. A lot of people have questions like, what happens if I burn my domains? Do I really not need warm-ups like forever? What can I do without them completely? Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So in this video, I'm going to explain, how ColdSend really works. And in order to explain that, I have to go deep into, what we really do when we say, we are trying to warm up an account or something, right? So to start with, we need to ask, what do warm-ups really do, right? And that question is also ties in with what do emails really work as, right? So here's a question I've asked, Kimi K 2.7, and I ask it, what do warm-ups really do? And I give a really good analogy, right? Just think of a brand new email address like a kid who just transferred to a new school, and on day one, nobody knows you, right? They don't know if you're weird or you're a bully, and you start handing out flyers to 500 kids. Everybody's going to say, this guy is a bit suspicious. We gotta ignore him. So the warm up is the way to make friends first, right? Like you start a little bit slow, you get to know a few individuals, and then once people know you as somebody who's a real human being and not a bot or something, that's when you can start, sending out flyers if you really want to do that. But there's one complication in this example is that, in this case, everything hinges on you as a person, right? It is your reputation and not the reputation of, let's say, the flyers that you're using or the channel of communication. And that is the complication that enters in the world of cold email, where there are two things essentially, what we call IP reputation and domain reputation, right? Because ultimately, the emails that you're sending, they're going out from a mail server, right? A mail transfer agent, to be more precise. And that agent has its own IP, right? And if that IP was used by a spammer in the past, then every mail server in the world has kept a record of that, and they know that this IP is suspicious. We should not be treating any communication from this IP, in a good way. But beyond the IP reputation, let's just imagine that the IP that you have is pretty good, it's fine, it has sent good communication in the past. Your domain reputation still matters, right? So if you just bought a new domain, right, it's not going to be very trustworthy. Like you want to understand that by default, fresh domains are not untrusted, right? They're neither trusted nor untrusted. You have to build a trust on those, right? So you have to get more precise about what you're really trying to improve when you're trying to warm up, right? So if you have, let's say you buy a dedicated server from which you want to send your emails. This is usually what happens when you buy your own SMTP server or a dedicated IP or something like that, that you start from an IP that is also not untrusted. And then you have domains that are also not untrusted, right? In this case, majority of your time is going to go into building up the reputation of the IP first, right? Because the IP is the vehicle through which you're going to be sending through different domains, right? And then you are going to be building the reputation of each of those domains. So in this particular case, the warm-up period is likely going to be months and months, and it's highly recommended that you don't even try to do the automated warm-ups in this case. You try to do, real human-to-human communication through this, because otherwise anything bad can happen. I will get to those, what bad things can happen, right? So just to give you more insights on, how to differentiate and, what do they really mean. So IP reputation is the trust score of the server sending the email. We've already covered this. The domain reputation is the trust score of your domain, right? The IP address is usually owned by the email provider. In the case of ColdSend, we use the IPs of Azure Communication Services, and I'll discuss those shortly. What that really means, right? Your domain reputation is tied to your domain, right? So if in the past you've sent spam campaigns to your domain, or if your domain is fresh, or maybe this just your domain is already blacklisted or whatever, then it doesn't matter what kind of IP we provide you, it's going to go into spam anyhow, right? IP can have a bad history too, right? It's possible that somebody used those IPs to spam in the past, and in that case, the IP has been blacklisted across the ecosystem, whatever, right? Now, but generally speaking, if you are on Azure Communication Services or even on Google Workspace, right, where the IPs are going to be rotated from a shared pool which Google or Microsoft is maintaining, you're going to have generally good IPs. In very rare cases, you're going to get assigned a bad IP, but in that case, there are ways to rotate that somehow, right? Usually, the provider itself will rotate the IP eventually, right? So you can recover it that way. But what happens when you're on one of these infrastructures and you're still landing in spam? It usually means that a bad domain reputation is sending you to spam. So you just burned your reputation somehow. And there are several ways you can do that. Maybe you just started with a fresh domain and you just send, let's say, 500 emails on day one. And out of those 500 emails, some 20, 30 people reported you spam, right? Now, you were by default not untrusted. And on day one, you sent a huge spike of emails, which is 500 emails from that one domain. And of those 500, you got spam reported by 20. What do you think will happen, right? Just imagine, being that kid in the new school who's sending out flyers to everybody, and some people got really pissed off at you. It's going to have some kind of social impact, right? So you gotta think of, IP reputation as something that, should be table stakes at this point in time. If you are getting it from a dedicated IP provider, there are a couple more steps that go into it. Like, you want to make sure that, other users of that, mail server of that IP provider are satisfied, they are okay, they are sending good campaigns, and if their reputation generally is good, go for it. Otherwise, stick to ACS, stick to Google Workspace, stick to, these big company IP pools, because they are the ones who have the resources to ensure that even if an IP gets blacklisted, they can recover that IP somehow. They do that. We're not going to go into details how they do that, right? So if you're using a good service for the IP, you're okay. It nearly always comes down to the domain reputation, and this is what he's trying to say. The domain reputation is usually the big one for cold emailers, especially because most people send through shared IPs from Google Workspace, Outlook, or a deliverability tool. And Google is going to care about who is sending, like, what's the domain and what's the engagement level, then, where it's coming from, because the where part is usually solved. And this is where warmup can actually help you, right? So if your domain is new, right, warmup can help you get some reputation. And the most important thing is that it's going to prevent sudden volume spikes, right? So if you're just going from 0 to 500 emails a day, it's a classic spam signal, right? So warmup can actually help you. But what the other thing that can also help you is just send good campaigns, or just send emails to maybe your internal company, or just use that domain internally in your own company for a bit, just do human to human communication, and then put it on warm up if you really want to do that. But the idea here is that you don't want sudden volume spikes. Whatever you do, avoid this. So now let's But there is one downside to warm up, and it's a little bit more sinister, bit of a problematic too, right? Because most of the warm up pools that you're going to use, they are using AI, right? They are not real human signals. So, you know, at best, they are going to be, not harmful. At worst, they are going to be actively harmful. So the way I'd like to describe it is that, what warm up really does is two things. If you're using an automated warm up tool like Smartly, Instantly, or any other, like even our own warm up that we provide you, we actually plug into Instantly's pool right now. Maybe in the future we'll build our own network, but you know, being very transparent here, you get Instantly's pool. Um, they just give you two things. Number one, they help you age the domain a little bit, right? So if you're just warming up the domain and you just bought it fresh, they are going to give you like 20, 30 days of respite before you actually start sending good emails. That helps because, as you will see shortly, actually let me show you this screenshot, and this is from this book called Run Your Own Mail Server from Michael Lucas. There are going to be a lot of mail servers that will not accept mail from domains that are less than 30 days old. Right. So this is like a classic spam signal that if your domain is less than 30 days old and you're sending campaigns of hundreds of emails per day, you're going to land in spam. Doesn't matter how good of a IP reputation you have or how good of an infrastructure you have. You're just going to land in that, right? So domain is not a part of the infrastructure. You gotta always separate that out. The infrastructure is always the IP reputation and the management around that, right? The domain is nearly always down to you, right? So when you do the warm-ups, even the automated warm-ups, they're just helping you, just put some age on that domain, and that can help. The other thing is they avoid, the volume spikes, right? These two things are beneficial. But now let's imagine that you're just running warm-up for months, and or you are doing warm-ups in huge volumes, or let's just say, you just keep on reusing the same pool of warm-ups, right? So at some point, Gmail can tell that it's a fake, right? And it's not going to give you any brownie points for doing it, right? So so there are some potential tells that can expose fake warm-ups, right? Repetitive templates and identical reply timing, a closed loop of the same seed accounts communicating only with warmed up mailboxes, right? So it's like if you just keep the warm-up on for a very long time, even after the initial stages of doing the warm up and then sending actual campaigns and then getting responses and then just going back to the same closed loop of seed accounts again, it could be problematic, right? So which is why people who do warm ups even with smartly, even with instantly, eventually at some point they're convinced that maybe the warm up is not very helpful, right? And there's a good reason for that. Usually this is the real problem, the same seed accounts being activated over and over again, right? But there are some really good warm-up providers who actually make sure that they can avoid some of these loopholes. I'm not going to recommend any, but you can probably find those. They usually have very very expensive pricing. So if the pricing is really high and some really enterprise folks are using that, then that's a signal. Actually, another way to look at it, it would be that, if Google or Microsoft are using a warm-up service to recover their own IPs, that's the warm-up service that you want to use if you can afford it. Otherwise, just make sure that you don't send bad campaigns. That's like the bottom line, always. Okay, now we come to what ColdSend does, right? So ColdSend is built on Azure Communication Services. We don't really have any infrastructure of our own, so to say, right? The infrastructure that we give you is Azure Communication Services. We just make it available for you so that you can actually use it and send emails through it, because usually, and also receive emails, because usually you can only send emails through ACS, you can't receive them. So we've just made that possible, and we packaged this in a sequence and stuff which is going to respect ACS limits. So if you export cold send inboxes and use that instantly, it's not going to respect the hourly limits. There is a way to make that work. We have some guides on our website, which are going to recommend some calculations that you do, so you still respect the hourly limits. But in our sequencer, we've taken care of that by default, right? So Azure Communication Services has this SLA, or service level agreement, in which it's going to give you IPs that are always pre-warmed, right? These are good IPs maintained by Azure. These are the ones that Microsoft Outlook 365 has been building for the last, several decades, because that's what's been running their business email infrastructure and the whole community, the whole city of emails that Microsoft is managing, right? So these IPs are nearly always guaranteed to be pre-warmed, that is to say, good reputation. There may be cases in which some IPs might be blacklisted. There is a possibility that somebody just sent spam in the past, but those IPs are going to be recovered eventually, because this is a part of Microsoft's own SLA, right? So we don't have to worry about the IP, right? The only problem here is that these IPs are dynamically allocated, right? So we don't control which IP you get allocated to when you use ColdSend. Right? You also don't control that. You can't request Microsoft to give you a specific IP, right? Because that's not a part of this service. They will give you an IP that they think is best for you. That's it, right? And there is a possibility that some IPs are going to be good, some IPs may be bad for the time being, right? But generally speaking, if you're using ACS, don't worry about the IP. It's going to sort itself out. The part that you really want to care about is the domain sender reputation. Right. So generally speaking, what I recommend is always bring aged domains, right? If it's a new domain, then prefer to turn on the warm up and also send actual campaigns, right? The reason I recommend that you do the warm up and the real campaign at the same time is because, you know, warm up is only going to help you with the volume spikes. So you don't send a huge campaign right from the get-go. You send a small campaign in the beginning just to see that, if you're going to get any kind of engagement or not. If you're really not confident, you're going to get any engagement at all, then just do the warm up. That's, up to you. But there could be a possibility that any warm up pool that you're using at that particular moment is corrupted, it's poisoned. Maybe there are some bad senders in there. Maybe maybe Google has picked up the trail and it's going to, really nuke you. So just a way to hedge it, send a real campaign, and also turn on the warm up, and keep things on low heat. But if your domain is aged and you have sent good campaigns from it in the past, then just go for it, buddy. Like just send as much as you want. But of course, avoid volume spikes. Like you always want to take it in steps, little by little. So if you've been sending 5 emails per day using that domain, don't jump to 50 from the get-go. Do it 10 in the first week, then 15, and then 20, and so on and so forth. We have the ramp up feature on our platform. You can use that. Otherwise, just set the limits manually. This is important. So there are some best practices that you can follow on ACS to make sure that you're not blowing through the reputation of your domain. I will make a separate video on that. But if you really want to do this, just search for sender reputation on ACS, and there's a really good guide for this on Azure's on documents. And if you go through that, you will understand, how they are managing the reputation of their IPs over time. And that will give you a good indication. So some of the things that you may notice on ColdSend is that sometimes you get bounces that really shouldn't be bounces, right? Like they could be emails that if you send them through another platform or another infrastructure, they would not bounce, right? The reason for that is because ACS maintains a global suppression list. So if any email in the past failed, failed as in a hard bounce in the sense that that email did not exist, or they just refused the email from ACS on IPs for whatever reason, they're going to put that in a global suppression list for a time period, and there's going to be an exponential back off. This is a little hard to explain how that works, but basically Microsoft is going to protect you from sending emails to bad emails, and that is automatic, right? So even if you get a lot of bounces on ACS, I would look for other triggers, other things, and not get too worried about that. Because even if you're sending those emails through other platforms and those platforms manage to send to those addresses anyhow, it's not guaranteed that that email is going to go into inbox. It's likely landing in spam, or maybe just straight up getting rejected and you're not getting the notice. There is that possibility. So the more you learn about how Azure communication services work, the better you can use ColdSend. I'm gonna be making some more guides on it. If you have any questions, ping me on Discord. But generally, the takeaway here is this: it's easy to start without warm up, hard to stay without warm up. So just keep that in mind always. I'll see you soon.